What is the most heartbreaking thing a loved one has ever done to you? Let me tell you about the worst thing a person I loved ever did to me. Back when I was a young, dumb teenager, I crossed paths with this girl. Both of us were just kids, really. I first laid eyes on her at the park a block from my place. We'd been messaging each other online for a few days before that, just casual stuff. One time, we sat down together on a bench and started talking about ourselves, our lives, who we were deep down. It didn't take long, maybe 2 weeks, before we were officially a couple. Man, we had a good thing going. The times we spent together were full of laughter and moments I'll never forget. I was crazy about her, totally in love, and even after everything fell apart, I still thought we'd end up together for good. Her folks were a disaster, though. Her dad was a no-good loser, always gone, and when he was around, he'd snatch money from her mom to keep his drinking habit alive. Her mom wasn't any prize either. She was hooked on drugs, didn't give a lick about her 3 kids, and paid the bills by peddling dope. I didn't just hear this from somebody else, I saw it all go down with my own 2 eyes. Funny thing is, when I first met her, I had no idea about any of it. She seemed like this nice, gentle girl who didn't know there was anything better out there than the crummy life she had at home. She kept all that mess under wraps until we'd been together for a while. I knew a thing or two about rough families myself. When I was a kid, my dad was a real piece of work, mean as hell, doing all kinds of rotten stuff to me and my mom. It got so bad that we up and left Mississippi, moved all the way to Australia to start over. So when I started hearing about her situation, it hit close to home. I thought maybe I could do something for her, help her get away from that awful house she was stuck in. Part of me figured that by pulling her out of her mess, I'd be patching up some of my own wounds too. That just dragged me in deeper, made me care about her even more. She started asking me to come hang out at her place. We'd watch movies together, sitting close on her beat-up couch. I'd have her over to my house too, where we'd swap tales about our lives. Sometimes, I'd take her down to the park just to give her a break from that dump she lived in. We'd hold each other tight, share a bunch of kisses. It was the best feeling in the world. Things between us kept heating up after a while, getting more serious. I loved it. I was 16, never had a girl in my life like that before, and it tied me to her even stronger. We kept at it for months, seeing each other all the time. She'd never been with anybody either, so we were both green, figuring it out as we went. That made it stick in my mind even more. Then Valentine's Day came around. We picked out little presents for each other, nothing big, just stuff that meant something. That night, we ended up at her place and decided it was time to take the next step. We both wanted to give ourselves to each other, so we did. Life was rolling along smooth after that. I picked up a job, started making decent grades in school, and living in Australia felt like a dream compared to the nightmare I'd left behind with my dad. I was feeling good, real good. But then her dad showed back up in her life. Once he rolled into town, he didn't leave. One day, she pulled me aside, all quiet-like, and told me how scared she was about him being back. I met the guy once, skinny as a scarecrow, pale, with long, greasy hair that waved down past his shoulders. He gave me a handshake and said it was nice to meet me, but I could tell right off he was no better than my own sorry excuse for a father. A couple months later, she turned up at my house, crying her eyes out. I bolted outside, threw my arms around her, and held her while she sobbed into my chest. She choked out the words, "He went and hit me." He finally did it, like she'd known it was coming all along. I was boiling mad when I heard that. After that, she wasn't the same girl anymore. It was like somebody flipped a switch, and the light in her just went out. She started playing loud, dark music, stuff she'd never touched before. She got real down, stopped showing up to school, and kept pushing for us to get closer in ways she hadn't before. One morning, she didn't swing by my place like usual so we could walk to school together. I was about to head out alone when something in my gut told me to check on her, even if it meant missing the bell. I walked over to her house, and her mom let me in, showed me to her room. There she was, lying in bed, wrapped up in the sheets, the room all dim and quiet. She looked calm, sure, but I could sense something was busted inside her. I almost shook her awake, but when I saw her like that, I changed my mind. Instead, I climbed in next to her and just held her for a bit. The second I put my arms around her, she grabbed my hand and ran her fingers over it. She'd been awake the whole time. I felt awful for her. She was always so full of life, even with everything she'd been through, but now she was silent, quieter than I'd ever known her to be. We stayed there, just lying together, for about 8 minutes. Then I said, "Hey, come on, we gotta get to school," and pulled her up. She grumbled, said she'd rather stay in bed and bawl all day. I told her school was a better spot than that worn-out house, and after a bit, she gave in and got moving. A couple weeks after that morning, we went out to the park together, just the two of us. I remember we were stretched out on the grass, staring up at the trees swaying in the breeze, talking about nothing much. Out of nowhere, she rolled over and climbed on top of me, sitting there with her legs on either side, looking down into my eyes with this flirty grin. I stared back, kind of thrown off, not sure what was up. As I held her gaze, something hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. The girl I was looking at wasn't the same one I'd met half a year back. That day her dad laid hands on her, had flipped her inside out, turned her into somebody I didn't recognize. She wanted to mess around right there in the park, which wasn't like her at all, not the old her, anyway. I could see the hurt eating at her, like she was scrambling to feel something, anything, to cover it up. I knew it wasn't right, wasn't healthy, so I told her, "Nah, we can't," and we grabbed our stuff and headed out. I walked her back to her place, and she asked me to come inside for a little while. We went straight to her room, and the second we were in, she kicked the door shut and shoved me down onto her bed. I chuckled at first, thinking she was just playing around, but then she started tugging at my belt. That's when it got real. I pushed her back and said, "Hold up, slow down." This wasn't like the other times we'd been together. It didn't feel like love driving her. It was pain, pure and simple. I could tell she was screaming inside for help, and this was how she thought she could fix it. I wasn't having it, knew it was a bad road, so I told her, "This ain't the way," and started for the door. She didn't let up, though. She grabbed me, pushed me back onto the mattress, and climbed on top again. "If you really love me, you'll let me do this," she said, her hands fumbling with my pants. That hit me like a load of bricks. Those words were nuts. I stopped her cold and said, "Whoa, hang on, we're not doing this. I've got school, and I'm already late." But she kept going, wouldn't listen. I shoved her off again, and she hollered at me, "Come on, I'm falling apart here. I need this. Quit making it hard." She came at me one more time, and I just froze. I didn't know how to stop her anymore, so I let her do what she wanted. The whole time, I felt weak, useless, ashamed down to my bones. I didn't say a word, didn't even look at her, just laid there. I've only ever told my best buddy about it, and he said it was wrong, called it sexual assault. Yeah, that's right, a guy like me got assaulted by a girl. I've kept it locked up ever since. Haven't breathed a word to my folks. They wouldn't believe me anyway, I reckon. It ate at me, not just because I'm a guy and people think guys don't end up in that spot, but because I trusted her, loved her with everything I had. After that, we never got close like that again. A few weeks later, she started crashing at my place. She'd gone to the cops about her dad hitting her, so she had to steer clear of him for 2 weeks. On the walk back to my house, she mentioned this other guy she'd been talking to. I made a dumb joke about Peter, said maybe she ought to grab him a beer or something. Shouldn't have opened my mouth. She flipped out, yelling at me the whole way home, swearing up and down she wasn't stepping out on me and I needed to trust her more. I felt bad and said I was sorry. Over the next couple weeks, she got tighter with this Peter fella. She'd be up till 3 in the morning, chatting with him on the phone. If I walked into the living room to give her a peck on the cheek or say something, she'd shoo me off, saying she needed space. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then she started hanging out with him, and this creepy feeling settled in my gut. I asked her about it, and she'd always hit me with, "You gotta trust me more." Don't you trust me? That'd spark a fight, something we'd never done before. I'd end up saying sorry every time, feeling like a jerk for even bringing it up. The arguments got nastier, and I started worrying big time. One night, I tried talking to her about how her day went, and all she could talk about was Peter, how great he was, all the cool stuff he did. I finally asked, "Anything happened today that ain't about Peter?" She hauled me into the kitchen and let loose, screaming at me louder than she ever had. The whole time, I kept seeing my dad's face in my head, like it was him chewing me out all over again. This wasn't the girl I fell for, she was somebody else now, a stranger. I felt like I'd let her down, like I couldn't save her or stand by her when she needed me. I tried everything I could, but she was gone, hollowed out inside. And truth be told, watching her yell like that, I started feeling hollow too. The next day, we were walking home from school. Right before we got to my front door, I stopped, turned to her, and laid it out. I said I couldn't keep going like this, that she was tearing me up inside. I told her I wanted us to work, but I was done being walked all over. She just spun around and took off. Half an hour later, she came back and said she was staying somewhere else. She looked me dead in the eye and told me I was turning into her dad, that me calling her out scared her stiff, and she couldn't stick around me anymore. Guess where she went? Yep, straight to Peter's place. Not long after that, she cut me loose for good. I was tore up something fierce, but at the same time, there was this weird relief mixed in with the hurt, like I'd been set free even though I was breaking. After I told her we were done for good, that was it, no more back and forth, no more nothing. She was out of my life, and I meant it to stay that way. But she didn't let it go easy. Word got around she was still talking about me, telling her pals I'd been mean to her, that I'd hollered at her or laid hands on her. It messed with my head something fierce. All I'd ever done was care for her, give her the best I had, and she was out there painting me like some kind of monster. I couldn't figure it out, and it hurt deep. A few months down the road, I started seeing somebody new, a fresh face, a chance to move on. That's when things got weirder. Her friends, the ones still loyal to my ex, took to following me home from school. They'd trail behind me, keeping their distance but making sure I knew they were there. It gave me the creeps. Then one day, out of nowhere, she fired off a text, telling me I had no business being with this new girl, like she still owned me or something. I wrote back plain and simple, we're both living our own lives now, and that's that. She didn't take it well, next thing I know, she's saying she'll kill me if I don't drop it. That was the end of the line. I cut off all contact right then, and we haven't said a word to each other since. That's how it's been, and that's how it still is today. A little while back, I sat down and wrote her a letter. Took my time with it, put down that I was letting go of all the bad she'd done to me, that I forgave her. I mailed it off, hoping maybe she'd read it and feel something, maybe peace, maybe regret, I don't know. Never got a reply, though. She didn't even acknowledge it, far as I can tell. Guess that door's shut tight. Now here I am, 18 years old, staring down the end of high school. I'd been on my own, single, for about a year now. That new girl I was seeing? It didn't last. We tried, but I was still carrying too much baggage from everything that went down with my first love. Couldn't make it work, not with all that weight dragging me down. It's taken me a solid year and a half to even start talking about this mess. I still feel the shame of it all, gnawing at me. Ain't just because of what happened, but how it happened to me, a guy, caught up in something folks don't think happens to guys. And worse, it was with somebody I trusted, somebody I thought I'd build a life with. That's the kicker, the part that still gets me. Looking back, it's been a long road to even say this much out loud. I'm still sorting through the pieces, figuring out how to shake off the embarrassment and move on. High school's almost in the rearview, and I'm hoping what's ahead is better than what I've left behind.